for joining us sorry. Thank you for joining us for LOMA and LOMR-F parts 1 and 2. So we decided to combine this into a 2-hour series. And so the first hour we'll look at the LOMA and then we'll focus on the LOMR-F in the second hour. And so we kind of just dive right in here. But a LOMA is a letter of map amendment. That's what it stands for. And so we have this series of letters of map change. And so there are multiple ones that you can have. And we do have training recorded on like a LOMAR and the more technical ones that require the MT2 application. And so if you're an engineer or someone that just wants to know more about the actual letter of map revision LOMAR, like I said, we have that recorded on our training page. And so those are much larger projects that you would be dealing with through the community and a much larger area. So you would be working with lots of contractors and other people on that kind of project. So these are the more day-to-day letters of map change that you would be dealing with individual property owners. And so these are the much more common ones that you'd be working through with individual property owners. So hopefully you will have some more information on how that works and why people want LOMAs and that kind of information. And so, as I said, letter of map amendment is an official letter from FEMA that says that this property or a section of property or an individual structure is outside of the floodplain. And so it's been mapped into the floodplain inadvertently because of the scope of the mapping. That scale, we cannot get down to that level, at least at this point. So some properties are inadvertently included in to the floodplain when they should not be. Even though the modeling has improved in 2D mapping, it's still at the scale that individual properties can be included when they shouldn't be. And so a LOMA is used when a property or the lowest adjacent grade to a structure is actually at or above the base flood elevation. And so the official letter from FEMA states that it is actually at or above the base flood elevation. And again, that's our national standard for the 100-year floodplain. And so you're either in or out of the floodplain. So property owners often seek this because they don't want to conform with the floodplain regulations, or most commonly, they don't want to have to purchase a flood insurance policy. And so if you have a mortgage that is federally backed through either the primary market or the secondary market, you are required to carry a policy. And so a lot of people want to get out of that requirement, and so they seek out the LOMA. And so we do have a base flood elevation portal that I think I'll get into later, but that can help inform this. And so when property owners seek this out, they do have to have survey information to be able to prove that they're outside of the floodplain. And so the services of either a surveyor or an engineer are required to prove that their property or structures outside of it. And so we have two different forms. So we have the MT1 form and we have the MTEZ. So the MTEZ is just a simplified version of the MT1. It's just meant to make things a little bit easier if you are working for one property. If it's just one single residential structure or property, you can use the MTEZ. If it's anything else, then you have to use the MT1. So that's like commercial. If it's multiple properties or for a LOMA that's in the floodway, then you have to use the MT1. The MTEZ is just a little bit less paperwork, but some surveyors just go ahead and use the MT1 for all cases, and that's fine just because it makes it simple. But the MTEZ, again, is for one lot or one structure, and it's residential only. But it's just kind of a simpler version of that. And yes, they did expire in 2014. So just a bit over a decade at this point, but Basically, FEMA says if a form is expired, you can use it until further notice until they release a new one. And so that has not happened yet. So if you save these forms to your device, to your network, it's good to just go back and check the website to make sure that you're not using an expired form, because once a new form is released, then these are superseded and you can't use them anymore. Or if they are used, they're not valid anymore. And so it's always good to just check to make sure that a new form has not been released yet. And at this point, FEMA is kind of limited on what they're able to do, so I don't anticipate that happening at any point soon. Um, and so we can continue here. So again, a letter of map amendment is for something that is on natural grade. So it's the natural earth that has not been altered in any way by fill. Um, so they have put in these questions to try to filter out if you're using the correct form or not. And so at the top it says, incomplete, they're going to ask for more information. And then question one is, has fill been placed on the property to raise the ground that was previously below the base flood elevation? And if so, then you need to stop and complete the MT1 application. So as I mentioned, a LOMA can be done on an MT1 application, any type of LOMA, that's fine. And then that's also what we'll be talking about for the LOMR-F. That's the form for the fill type of letter of map revision. And so basically this is saying, a LOMA is for natural ground. If you've put fill on there, then stop. You're applying for the wrong type of letter of map change. And so if you've done that, then it needs to be changed. And so the second part is the legal description, the second question. So you'd put the address. For rural properties, sometimes there is not an exact address, like an NG 911 address. And so you can use the legal descriptions. You can also use an abbreviated description. So you can just make sure that it matches the deed for that property. And then are you requesting that a flood zone determination be completed for what? Either, as I said, a structure on the property. They want to know the construction date, and that will help evaluate whether you're using the right form or not. Is it a portion of property? As I mentioned, sometimes there's just a portion of property that surrounds a certain area, like a structure, and you can remove that from the floodplain so that you have a little bit more leeway with where you can do things that are not in the floodplain. And so that requires that meets and bounds description for that section of property, or it could be an entire legally recorded property. The entire property is outside of the floodplain. So you just need to specify that for this LOMA. And then there is the caveat that any fill that was placed in the area before it was mapped into the floodplain is considered natural grade. And so that would require a little bit of research. Sometimes you can use historical, like aerial photography, or there could be records about when that fill was placed. But if it's before it was mapped into the special flood hazard area for the first time, then you can go ahead and document that and use it as natural grade. So then the second part is very straightforward. It's just, the applicant's name. Definitely use the email address because it's much easier to communicate that way than through postal mail. The mailing address, phone number, signature, and date. So it's just easier to use that than traditional communication, and you can resolve any issues or send any other needed information than by postal mail, obviously. So then there's just a checklist. It's not a difficult form. So we're just determining for one structure, the lowest adjacent grade is higher than the actual base flood elevation. So you have the structure that's located on natural grade, the legally recorded parcel of land. So either the structure or the parcel and then what the property description is, and then structure information. It's very straightforward, and they definitely want to know what type of construction they're looking at. So there is a possibility of a pre-firm structure being able to have a LOMA, even if it has a basement. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. There's a concept called intervening higher grade, and we have used this before to get structures with basements out of the floodplain, but it's not very common. But you need to determine what type of foundation we're looking at. And then, of course, the geographic coordinate data is important. We need to know what that coordinate is and make sure that everything is consistent with the coordinates. And so basically what we're confirming here is that the 100-year flood would not inundate this structure. And we're looking at all these different characteristics of the structure and how it's positioned in contrast to the base flood elevation, basically. So you can find the tax parcel number and stuff like that from appraisal or property tax forms. Again, the block and lot number may not apply in a rural area or a street address. You might have to go and look at the documentation for that structure, usually with the deed, like at the appraiser's office or county recorder's office to find some of that stuff. And then I think we're up to like 6, I think, decimal places, at least on the elevation certificate. So it might be good to go 6 places instead of 5. So they were kind of very specific about how many decimal places that you use in the coordinates. It's probably good to go up to 6 at this point because of how the elevation certificate has changed, even though these have not been updated in, again, a very long time. And then the NFIP community number and the map panel number. So they want you to be very specific about these. That's a 6-digit number for your community number, and you can find that either on the FEMA Map Service Center website, or you can use the community status book. So if you look up either of those, there's a 6-digit number for every single community that participates, and in Kansas, those all start with 200, except for Topeka, which is 205. So they all start with 200, and then there's another 3 digits that go with that. So you can find those online. And then the map panel number is very specific. There is an abbreviated panel number, and then there's the full panel number. And so I kind of go over this more in like our mapping classes, but it should be easy enough to find either on the FEMA Maps Service Center, or you can find it on the National Flood Hazard Layer, which is FEMA's web map for digital firms, or our state floodplain viewer. You can find it on there as well. It's a layer that you can turn on, so just make sure that you have the full map and panel number. And then the base flood elevation has to be calculated. So that's the next part. If it's a zone A, we can assist with that. If it's a detailed study area, then you would use the flood insurance study that goes along with that, and we can always assist with determining what a base flood elevation is. And then you would say what the source is, which is usually the flood insurance study, or you could say KDA determined it, or wherever that happened. If it's a zone A, there may be other agencies that have calculated a base flood elevation nearby that you could find. But again, we can always help with that. It could be like KDOT or something like that. So it's just a matter of finding out what that is. And then the other important part here under 5, the elevation information, again, survey required. So we need a licensed professional to determine what the ground conditions are for the LOMA. So a surveyor or an engineer, not an architect. Architects cannot do that in Kansas, but the other important factor here is what is the lowest adjacent grade. And so this is what we're comparing to the base flood elevation to determine eligibility for this letter. And so the lowest adjacent grade that is touching the structure, or the lowest lot elevation for a full property or a section of property, is what we're looking at to make sure it's at least the same height as the base flood elevation or higher. And so that's what they ask for on that part. And then the other one is for if you're doing more than the structures, what is the meets and bounds lowest lot elevation for that property? And so it just depends on if you're doing a section of property or a structure, that will dictate which one you're using, and then what datum. And then if you have to do a conversion, then you would need to add an attachment so it indicates that which datum are you using, or if you had to convert that, please add that attachment. And so obviously that would be for the surveyor or the engineer to do, but the National Geodetic Service is the one that hosts most of the benchmarks. So there's a map that you can look at, and you can look into each of those benchmarks and where they're located and how you can use them. And then they have that conversion software as well. So I think it's called NCAT. And I think I have a slide later on about doing that, but just indicate if there was a conversion. And then a little bit about, has FEMA identified the land subsidence or uplift? We do have a little bit of areas of subsidence in Kansas because of different types of mining. And so I think it's in Cherokee and one other county. I think it might be Reno, but there's a few areas in Kansas, like southeast Kansas, that have some subsidence areas just because of that. So it's something to be aware of. Oh, I have it in my notes. Yes, Cherokee and Reno counties have that because of mining. Um, okay, I think that's all for that. And then, of course, the certifier's information there at the bottom where they add their license seal. So these instructions actually were updated in 2021. So if you go and look at the MT-EZ and MT1 applications online, they're added as Word documents, but they did add more detailed instructions in 2021. And usually FEMA does that when they have some lessons learned and they want to improve the application process. So they've added more information to make it clear what's needed. And so if you ever get stuck on something, you can always look through the application instructions and it will probably answer your questions. Of course, I'm always here, but it would probably be good to familiarize yourself with the instructions, and that way you have a full rounded out understanding of what goes into applying for a LOMA or a LOMR-F as well. They have those instructions for the MT1 application. And so as I mentioned, for the NFIP community and panel number, you can find them on the title block here for your map panel. And so, as I mentioned, you can find these on the Map Service Center. So this is kind of an older form of what that looks like. Our updated maps look a little bit different, but there are some communities that still have these older paper maps or just older firms that are not quite in the same format anymore. As I mentioned, you can find the community number here. And I mentioned the community status book. You can always just look it up very quickly, but they are on all of your firm panels, what your community number are, and it's a 6-digit number that starts with 200. And then the full map panel number there at the bottom is 20177C, and the C is for community wide, and then 0193E, that's the actual panel number. And so at the top, it kind of says 193 of 450, and that's an abbreviation. And so they're looking for the full map number, which is down there, the full map and panel number. So E is the suffix on that, and it indicates how many times the map has been revised and published. And so just information there. So that's the full numbers that they're looking for on the application. And then again, the base flood elevation has to be calculated. There are different ways to calculate it. Um, so I'll walk you through the map service center. And then again, what the source of that base flood elevation is, how was this calculated, to make sure that it's been done appropriately. We're not just taking a number off the firm. So they will show you the approximate base flood elevations, but we actually have to look at the direct property or the direct structure to make sure that it's been calculated for that position exactly. And so some people kind of have this misunderstanding that either you can take the number off the firm or like any nearby base flood elevation is what it is for that property. It's very specific to that property or that structure. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish with that. It needs to be very precise. And so if you go to the Map Service Center, you can just Google that FEMA Map Service Center or any variation of those words, and you'll probably be able to pull it up. And so this is what we have when you get to the homepage. So if you are looking at for a specific address and you have a digital map, you can just use the search bar and put in the address and then pull it up that way. And that will just take you to the National Flood Hazard Layer. And again, that is FEMA's web map. And you can use it that way. You can print out a little fermet is what we call them. So it's just a little flood map that is zeroed in on your area of interest, or you can go to the search all products, and that's where you can find the flood insurance study, so the FIZ that you would need for a detailed study where you'd have to calculate it that way if you have a detailed study area. You can find the digital data that's been published. You can find the letters of map change. You can find all of them for your community under that search. And so it just pulls up more products than the quick search at the top. So there's a couple different ways to do it. Either one is fine. Um, if you go to search all products, so um, sorry, if you go to the search bar, this is what you'll find. So I just pulled up our office address in this case. So this is what you'll find. It will just pull up your location and you'll get an overview of what the flood mapping looks like. And so you can see we're adjacent to the floodplain and the floodway. So you can see that information. It gives you all of the details of the cross sections and everything. And then if you click in the middle of the screen, dynamic map, that will give you your format. So you might have to search a couple of different times. You might need to enter the zip code. If you have like multiple zip codes in a community, that has happened before. So you might have to enter that. But if you click dynamic map, once you've found your location, it will generate a National Flood Hazard Layer format for you. And so this gives you all of the details of the flood mapping, so you can see the legend there and all the different things that we've been able to generate, the scale of the map, and just all of that detail. So it's very simple if this is just what you need for an applicant that you're reviewing, or for new development, if you just want to generate one of these maps and then save them to the file, that's fine. And then this is what happens when you go to search all products. So if I put in, the state and then the county, the community, it will pull up what products they have, both historical and current or pending. So it's the more detailed version of that. So once you get there, it'll show you the effective products. And so if I put down firm panels, then it will show me all of the panels that we have currently for Topeka. So um, you don't want to download all of them probably. So don't do that. But it'll show you all of the firm panels, and the first one is the index, and that will show you basically a map of the panels and where they exist in the different parts of the community so that you can identify which panel it is that you're looking for. Um, so this is kind of an older one, but as I said, we still have some of these older maps in Kansas, so we have these as examples. So this is what the index looks like, and you can see where all of the different panels are laid out for the city of Lawrence. And you can use these larger landmarks to help identify what panel you're looking for just by what area of the city it is that you're focused on. And so they have like the airport labeled, they have railroads, they have major highways labeled, and that will help you identify what panel it is that you're trying to find. And then you can go back to the list in the Map Service Center and open it. So this is what it looks like when you open one of the panels. So this is back in Topeka, again, our office location. And so the mapping style is just a little bit different depending on what source you go to. And so I showed you the National Flood Hazard Layer, which is FEMA's digital layout, and then you have this, which is still digital, but it's got a black and white aerial photo in the background, and then you have the floodplain in blue, and then I think they put the floodway in, yeah, it's in white, and then you have like the other areas like the 500 year that will be mapped in black, but you have those harsh lines that show you the exact border and barrier between different zones or what's in the X zone outside of the floodplain. So anything outside of the floodplain is called Zone X. Um, and so there have been issues with this particular style where people said that their house wasn't covered in dots or something like that, even though it was inside the line. So I don't know if this is the best format, but this is what you get when you open up the full panel, and then you can create a format with this as well. So again, it's just a slightly different mapping style, but you can go to that button and then it will have you customize what your format should look like. So you get to choose what the page size should be. And then once you're happy with that, you go to select print area, and then you'll be able to drag that green box in the left-hand corner. You can drop that into what your area of interest is, and then you just kind of customize those other grayed out boxes on the right lower hand side. So those will turn green, and you can just kind of customize where you want the north arrow and the title block. And then once you're done with that, you just preview it, and then you can go back and adjust things, or you can just download it as either a PDF or PNG file. We use all PDFs at the state. It works for many different reasons better than other formats, so PDF is good. And then you just download it and you can just save it with your file for that property. And so we always recommend, as FEMA has put in publications, to organize things by property location, organize your files by geography, and so you just keep track of individual properties that are in the floodplain. So, for example, if you have a new subdivision area that's being built and you want to come back to it, then you can make this ferment and then keep that on file with that property in association with that development, and then obviously just click save for that. Yeah, again, two different file formats. And then this is what it looks like. Aerial photography background. You have the blue dots for the floodplain, and it's labeled Zone AE, and then you have the interior part with the floodway that always has a cross hatching, and that's in white. You have the stream line there, stream center line, and then everything else is called unshaded Zone X, which is considered to be at minimal risk, so it's not regulated. Um, so yeah, as you could probably see how this might cause issues, but basically anything inside that blue line is considered to be in the floodplain, even if it just touches part of a structure, and it is regulated. So it shouldn't cause issues, but it has. So I'll say that. Base flood and the source of base flood elevation. So again, the the cross hatching is where the floodway is. Then you had the AE zone. This is the same style of mapping. It just looks a little bit older. I think the map has been updated since then, but it still looks very similar. And so this is a very old style of measuring the base flood elevation. I don't think we have to do it this way anymore. And we have plenty of recorded training on how to determine what the base flood elevation is in different zones. Again, I'll go over the portal in a little bit, but this is a very old style of doing it. But if you have a paper map, say in like Western Kansas still, this is valid as long as you print the map out to the actual size so that you don't get any distortion. But like people can do it this way, and it basically proves it's very simple, and the engineers have already done all the work for us. We just have to use the information that they've given us to make that determination to the best of our ability. And there is a little bit of leeway in like judgment call on what it's supposed to be. Again, this is the older way when we have some like paper maps. As long as you print it to size, that works. Of course, you can always measure them electronically. You can pull them into your GIS software, which is usually what we're doing these days. But if you did it this way, it's still valid. You have this pink string, and so my one of my predecessors did this. So you have the pink stream, and you can just lay it along the center streamline. And so that is on the map. It's reflected on the map. So what we're supposed to be doing is measuring along the stream channel. And so obviously the stream meanders. It's not a straight line. And so that's why we have a string where we can lay it along the stream channel and then take that length and use whatever that length is. To determine what the base flood elevation is. So if we lay it over the stream, we take the 2 points that we're looking at, which is the upstream cross section, and we measure that to where our location is for that property or for that structure. And then how long that length is, we know how far to measure. And so what we're trying to do is find where the upstream corner of our area of interest, how far that is from the upstream cross section. So that's the point of the string. And then once you measure that, we'll go to the flood profile that's in the flood insurance study. And so this is for a detailed study area. As I mentioned, the A zone's a little bit different in how we determine that, depending on what data we have for it, how old the map is, and what the situation is, what the purpose is for determining it. So there's lots of variations for determining this. I may not be explaining it that well, but in this instance, we're looking at a detailed study area, and as noted in this photo, the X is the location of the house, and so you can see it down here. We have the engineering scale on the photo, on the map, and so that X, we're looking at the two cross sections that surround that area. So we have L and M cross sections. So that's what we know. So we know to go to this particular flood profile in the flood insurance study for this particular stream, and then we're going to look at cross sections L and M. And then how far downstream is our location from the upstream cross section? And so that's what we're interested in, and that's why we had the string to put on that stream profile, because you can see the extreme curvature in that meander. It's not a straight line, and so that's why we have the string to accurately capture that distance. And so we call the center streamline the Thalweg, which basically means like the center of the stream where the water is flowing the fastest, and that's what we use for our mapping standards. And so we try to measure along the stream channels. Engineers don't always do that because they consider the water to be over bank flowing and it flows straight. But technically we're supposed to use the stream channel. And this has changed a lot with our 2D mapping. This is a 1D map. And so, as I mentioned, we have plenty of training that we've recorded on the different mapping methodologies and how this has changed with our new maps. But this is what it looks like currently for the 1D mapping if you were to determine a base flood elevation. And so, as I mentioned, we're measuring the distance from our property to the upstream cross section. So we have L and M here. So this is what the stream profile looks like, and you can find these towards the end of the flood insurance study. And so basically every stream that you have in your community that is mapped has its own flood profile if it's a detailed study. And so you would pull this out, make sure you have the right flooding source because I've done this before and I'm like, oh wait, this is the wrong stream. So just make sure you find the right stream and look at your cross sections. And so basically this is what the stream looks like if it was graphed out based on the map. Like here's the map and then here's what the stream looks like in map form or in graph form with all of the cross sections laid out, and then it will show you all of the elevations and the different flood frequencies and things like that. So each of these, as you can see, are like measured out by like different intervals. And so just make sure you're measuring appropriately. They've made it very easy for us to use these graphs. So looking at L and M, how far is our house from the upstream cross section? And so in this case, it was 6 of these tick marks on the engineering scale, or 2 of these, or sorry, 6 boxes between these 2 cross sections, and then 2 tick marks on our engineering scale from the upstream cross section is where our area of interest is. And so once you find your area of interest in relationship to those 2 cross sections, again, mostly the upstream cross section that we're measuring, but the other just kind of make sure we're in the right location. But once you find where that is in distance from the upstream cross section, then you just mark that point. You just go straight up, and then if you see those diagonal lines towards the top, those are the different flood frequencies, and there's a little like locator in the bottom corner that tells you which of the flood frequencies are. So the bottom one, that's just kind of a broken line, that one is the bed of the channel, and then above that you have the different flood frequencies for like 50, 100, 500 years. And so once you find the where your point intersects with the 100 year, you just mark that point and then just go straight vertical over to the side, and that will tell you what your base flood elevation is, and which we determined was 1278.2. Again, this is kind of an older method of doing it, and we do have more updated um, videos, especially on 2D determinations, but this is kind of an older one, and it's more simple to just kind of explain it this way, I think. So we've kept these slides in here. But yeah, once you find the intersection with the 100-year stream with that solid line, you just go straight over. And so all of the detailed studies in the flood insurance studies have these flood profiles so that people can make these determinations, which is usually a surveyor or an engineer, but it's always good to go and check their work and make sure that they're on track with what has been determined because mistakes have been made before. So mistakes that probably could have been prevented just by double checking people's work and making sure we're all on the same page. Um, and again, if you do it this way, there is some variation and, like I said, judgment call, but you just want to be as precise as possible. And you can even round it up a little bit if you want to, as the floodplain administrator, just to be safe and make sure that people are a little bit safer, and it's not that expensive to build something like 0.2 feet higher. just the higher you are, the more safe you are, and it doesn't really hurt anything. And then once you have used the flood profile, you can go to the floodway data table. So this is kind of more towards the middle or the first part of the flood insurance study. And then you can go to the flooding source. So in this case, it's Dry Creek. So if you just go to the floodway data table, you can go and look at your cross sections and see what their regulatory base flood elevation is. So the cross sections have their exact base flood elevations determined. And so you can go here and just make sure that your numbers falls somewhere in between the two of those. Because if it's outside of that range, then you've made some kind of mistake. But these are the exact elevations. And sometimes you'll have a structure or a project that has a cross section going directly through it, and you can use that number. And that's really convenient. But yeah, if it's outside of that range, you've done something wrong and you need to go back and look through um, and make sure that you get that corrected. So why is it important to use the flood insurance study and make sure that you actually calculate the base flood elevation? So in this case, and is I don't think common, but it has happened before in this case, and this is an older one. As you can see, this is an elevation certificate that form expired in 2009. But in this case, the surveyor took the base flood elevation just that was on the firm, because as I said, they kind of put rounded, generalized base flood elevations on the firm just to give you an idea of what that elevation is supposed to be. And the base flood elevation has to be calculated to 1/10 of a foot. So we need 1 decimal point on this base flood elevation. That's the standard. Um, and so they took this rounded number without calculating it as a house was being built. And if you look at section C 2A here, the top of the bottom floor was 278.1. And they used the rounded base flood elevation, arbitrarily measured, and then went ahead with the construction of this house. Um, the actual base flood elevation is like a foot higher. They took a downstream number to complicate things. So the actual base flood elevation is like 279 or something, and then they built the lowest floor at 278.1, and then we have the 1 foot statewide freeboard standard. So they ended up building the house 1.1 feet too low for compliance. And so that created a lot of issues, not only for their flood insurance costs, but obviously it's a violation that then has to be corrected. And this was not caught by the floodplain administrator. And it's really important that we look at these things and we make sure that things are done correctly, because it's a lot less expensive to elevate something before it's completed. As we just put the foundation in, that should be checked, because once the house is built, it's really expensive to try to elevate something. And then, I mean, the communities have been sued over this and have had to pay for the elevation project. So it is pretty serious, and it's always worth it to just go back and check that things are correct, and go out and do inspections as things are being built. We always encourage that. We always try to make sure that that's being done, because it can backfire where communities have to pay for houses to be elevated, even entire neighborhoods. And so it is pretty serious, and you are responsible for making sure that things are reasonably safe and that you're enforcing your regulations. And so you don't want to go to your city council and tell them that you have to pay for that. That is not good. Just a little warning there. So this is our base flood elevation portal. If you're in a zone A, if you have a project there, you can go to our site and register for an account, and then you go to the map and make sure that you draw your polygon as precise as possible. and we will go in and calculate it, and we'll use different data depending on what the purpose is, but we'll definitely use the most conservative data if it's for new construction. And so we have this service available. We have someone in our office that goes through these individually, and then we review them and then give them out to make sure that they are accurate. So we do have someone in our office that actually calculates these. It's not an automated service, so it may take some time. We are understaffed currently, but looking for new talent. But we do take these very seriously. But if you want to just look at an area, you can go into the map tab and then just click around, and it will give you the LiDAR elevation so that you can kind of get an idea of what the elevation at that certain places, and then you can look at the approximate base flood elevation. And we use this a lot and encourage people to look around to see if maybe they might be eligible for a LOMA. So the LiDAR is accurate to plus or minus a foot, and so it can give you a good idea of whether or not it's worth paying for a survey to apply for a LOMA. And so we use it for that. You can also get a LiDAR LOMA if it's like over 2 feet above the base flood elevation. So then you don't even have to get a survey at that point. But it's a very useful and helpful tool that we use quite a lot. And so I have enlarged the LiDAR value at the top just to show you what it looks like. But yeah, it will show you in red what the approximate base flood elevation is and then what your approximate LiDAR value is. And so it's a very good tool to get that feel for what the ground situation is. It can be skewed by things like tall grass and stuff, but it is still a good tool. And so this is like our help flyer. So it just kind of walks you through what to do. You just find your property, try to accurately draw a polygon, and then if you can, give us the best description of what you need from your request in the little notes tab, and then submit, and we will be in touch. Within 5 days, we'll at least let you know that we're working on things, or we might reach out for more information. And then this is what you get back is a determination letter from us. If we are able to go through with the requests, which usually we are, sometimes people make requests outside of the floodplain or in an area of detailed study, but yeah, we do send these letters out, and then this can support your LOMA application or just give you the information about what the base flood elevation is for, a letter map change, or uh, a lot of surveyors use it for like the elevation certificate or something. And then just kind of a little bit about flood insurance, because the new elevation certificate allows people to apply on their own, just measuring their own properties without a survey to get a policy. But basically, the new rating methodology that FEMA is using for flood insurance is no longer just the first floor or the lowest floor and the base flood elevation. They're now looking at all these different types of data to pull into their rating engine, which we don't have access to. It's a bit of a black box that we don't know how things are rated or weighted particularly. Um, but we just know that they're using all these different data points, including past claim data and these other data sets from different agencies. But people can get discounts by doing these mitigations. So there's a whole mitigation discount guide, and so you can get credit for having your machinery and equipment elevated, for having proper vents, for having different foundation types and stuff like that. So it's just a little aside on flood insurance. Again, the letter of map change doesn't help the structure, but it will take them out of the requirement to have flood insurance. Unless their lender just requires it anyways, they can do that. We do have LiDAR everywhere for the entire state. We have base level engineering for the entire state now, so anywhere can get a base flood elevation from DWR. So we do have that at this point. We have the entire state base level engineered. If you have specific questions about that, Joanna, who is our mapping coordinator on our floodplain team, would probably be the best contact at this point. So you can reach out to her, or if you reach out to me, I will probably ask her or direct you to her. Um, so just a little bit, what is base level engineering? So as I mentioned, we have started using 2D mapping, and I'm not an engineer or anything, but it's a different way of modeling what happens as far as water movement. So it's not just along the stream channel, we're looking at how it moves in these different directions with these meshes, rather than cross section, to calculate that movement everywhere and not just along the specific streams, as I said. And so these break lines are used to realign the mesh cells along the features, such as roadways and stream banks, and they are kind of reliant on the data that we have. Like the LiDAR that we have, I think, is from 2018, and so that hasn't been reflown, at least to my knowledge, and so we are using that. And so we do, when we map with communities, ask for any additional data that the community might have or additional input and things like that to better refine and accurately reflect the flooding in that community. So we do have a whole presentation on this, although things are changing with the new administration and how the direction of mapping might be going. So we have yet to determine that. But we do have this initiative that had been going on for the last couple of years. So we do have this for the entire state, at least this rudimentary base level engineering, and so that we can provide more flood risk data to areas that may not have had that. So they may not have had a map, or it may be outdated or something. So we do have a presentation on how things have gone in the last couple of years and where we were going in our trajectory, but that might change. But if you are interested in that, the history and future of flood mapping is available on our website. So this is the state viewer, and so it's very similar to the national flood hazard layer. As I mentioned, it's very similar, but it's very specific to Kansas. So we have different layers that they don't have that you can turn on and look at, like different approximate base flood elevations for zone A. We have the map and panel number on there, so you can pull all of that information that I went over. If you need that information, you can find it on our state viewer. So I use this pretty much every day, and you can do that. So we have measuring tools and other things. You can also make a format. So this is what it looks like if you do it from our state viewer. And so this is in Lawrence, and I've pulled up the approximate base flood elevations for the zone A, which can be helpful for surveyors if they have to calculate something in zone A. Again, we do have the portal that you can use. So very similar. So just a little bit about calculating base flood elevations in the A zone once again. And so this is something that we do in our office with the portal. So if you have two like stream sources in this case, with the fork in the stream, we'll take the higher base flood elevation, and that's just the appropriate methodology that is in the MT1 guidance. So if you have questions about how things are supposed to be done, MT1 Technical Guidance is a publication that kind of helps explain all of this, and how things should be calculated and all the different methodologies and how to calculate in an AO zone and just like all the details of how to do that. So if you need more help in that way, that's definitely a good publication to look at. So yeah, just a little example of how that would be done. We always take the more conservative number, especially if it's for um, new construction and that kind of stuff. But we are always working on our maps. I just updated this one. So this is as of January 2025, where we are in our mapping projects. Joanna has been hard at work on our business plan and everything and how we prioritize communities, counties. Most of what we've been doing is countywide firms, but there can be like individual streams and stuff that get mapped. If you're ever interested in having a new map, if you can get community support behind doing that and any new data that may be useful and that kind of stuff, we can help prioritize counties over others. So we are dependent on what gets funded and what's planned for like 5 years or something, that kind of thing. Again, Joanna's the expert on that stuff, but we have been talking lately about how counties get prioritized, and community support is definitely one of the things that can help prioritize and justify funding is just showing your interest and the community interest and maybe what's wrong with your current map, or if you have new problems and that kind of thing, definitely to come talk to us so that we can make note of that and then start prioritizing different counties for maps. Obviously, our goal would be to map the entire state, but of course, that's dependent on funding. And then during the mapping process, things change in communities, like development continues to change, and then sometimes by the time we get in a published map, it's kind of out of date. But we're we're trying very hard. It's a long, tedious process with a lot of bureaucracy in there, but we try, and we do have some communities and counties that are still on paper maps from like the 70s and 80s. And so we're trying to get through those. Some of them are low priority just because the flooding risk is not very severe. Um, but yeah, we do try to work on that. So section 5. The lowest adjacent grade, again, that gets compared to the base flood elevation, and if it's at or higher than that, then you can get the LOMA. Or the meets and bounds description, don't forget your datum. And then this is what I mentioned earlier, the intervening higher grade around a building. So if you have a pre-firm structure, an older structure that has a basement, but the outside grade is at or above the base flood elevation, then FEMA will consider it intervening higher grade that would protect the basement from being flooded. And so there's a whole section of this in the MT1 guidance that goes over how this works and how it should be documented. But again, it has to be a pre-firmed structure and it has to be built on natural grade, not fill. But we did do this recently and we got out of a substantial damage case where the house had been burnt and was substantially damaged, but we were able to get them the intervening higher grade LOMA because it was an older house and it was built on natural grade, and that took away the substantial damage requirement that they fill in that basement and then elevate the lowest floor. So that is a strategy that we were able to use. Um, in the bottom right, the potential intervening higher grade, um, I've been told that FEMA does not like things that are covered in concrete, even if it is natural grade. And so I guess a lot of those have not been approved, but yeah, it's if you have a building like this with the ramp, obviously it's a commercial building. The lowest adjacent grade is down there at the bottom of that ramp. Um, so different situations, FEMA might consider an intervening higher grade, again, residential natural grade, not commercial, not unnatural, not fill. So it could work. I think sometimes it just depends on who you have as a reviewer, but in one of these cases, they included a sketch just to illustrate where those elevations are. And so you can see this little sketch at the top where they put in the where the lowest adjacent grade is and the intervening higher grade. And that might just help them with the review and understanding what the ground situations are to approve that. And so this one was attached to an approved LOMA. Um, Additional documentation. So all of these applications have a little checklist to make sure that you have everything you need to submit. And so you do need a copy of the firm panel. You need a copy of the plat map, which you can find with the recorder's office where the deed is kept, and then a copy of that deed, and then a map, which includes a map scale and north arrow. Um, so yeah, they might just reach out for more information. Again, having that email communication increases the efficiency. So just making sure you have all these submitted and then checking for any further communication. Again, this is what the format looks like from the Map Service Center. This is the National Flood Hazard Layer, so they have this different color scheme that's supposed to assist with color blindness. So it's just a slightly different format. And then we're getting to the end here. We'll take a quick break and then get into the second part. But this is a LOMA out as shown. And so basically, sometimes banks have a third-party determination company that if you have any floodplain on your property, they will say that it's in the floodplain, even if it's not touching the structure. And so FEMA has this process called LOMA out as shown, where you can just submit a map and some other documents, and you don't need a survey. Like a property owner can do this themselves. So there's a whole instructional um, handout that I can send you, but basically they just submit a few documents and a map that shows that the floodplain is not touching their structure, and that will give them a LOMA, which will then take away any mandatory flood insurance requirements as long as it's based on flood zone and not the lender, because the lender can always require flood insurance no matter what. And it homeowners insurance does not cover flooding. But this is what that handout looks like. So it's very simple and straightforward, and you can just give this to property owners. So that's basically it. It's you have those step-by-step instructions, you make a ferment, you send a copy of the deed, and then yeah, you can have like a local map or some map that shows that it's not actually mapped in, and that will fix that. If you already have an elevation certificate, you can submit that with a LOMA request. And if it's, proving that the lowest adjacent grade is already at or above the base flood elevation, that can also be submitted for a LOMA. Again, the lowest adjacent grade is in C2. A is the lowest floor, and then you have the lowest adjacent grade, and then the BFE is in B9 section of the elevation certificate. So they can submit it instead of having a new survey done. And there's an online portal submission. Oops, what did I do? Oh my goodness. Sorry, guys. Somehow went all the way back to the beginning. I hit a button. Okay, sorry. So how to submit, there's an online portal submission that the surveyors can submit that through, and that's how FEMA prefers it instead of postal mail. They've really tried to go more digital. And then um, a LOMA does not take away your flood risk. I mean, if you're just outside of the floodplain, it's a good idea to have flood insurance. You might be able to get the price down depending on different aspects, but again, the LOMA does not take away your risk, and you can absolutely still be flooded, especially if you're just right outside of a high risk area. So it's always important to remember people or to remind people that they need to consider flood insurance or consider the risk that they're at, because you know flood insurance is the best way to recover. And if you have a total loss of your home, that could be life altering. So it is serious. It's also a safety factor, so just keeping those things in mind. And then we're almost done here. We'll take a break, but when FEMA denies a LOMA, they kind of send out a letter that looks exactly like a LOMA. And so sometimes people think they have one, or a LOMR-F. This happened not too long ago. Someone was like, I have a LOMR-F. I can do what I want. And like it turned out it was a denial. So they don't make it very obvious, but in the upper right corner, it says LOMA DEN, which means denied. And then underneath that, it says non-removal, whereas the actual approved LOMA says removal. So they're not very um, obvious about that. So it's something to look for. Just make sure that you when you look at a LOMA, is it actually approved or it could be denied if you're not looking very closely. And so I don't know why that is. They're just very like discreet about it, which is not good for violations and enforcements and misunderstandings. Lastly, and I'm sorry, we're going a little bit late. Um, yeah, they may or may not remove that flood insurance requirement before the property owner goes through this process. Make sure that the requirement is based on the special flood hazard area and it's not just something they require overall. Um, if you have a new map, they will reinterpret the status of those letters of map change. It could be incorporated, superseded, redetermined, or yeah, there's 4 different categories. So when people get new maps, I always reach out to them and be like, hey, these people are getting superseded. And obviously, those are the ones that people get the most upset about because their letter has been invalidated based on new determinations of the current, map, what the new base flood elevations are. So, again, it could be the lowest adjacent grade, the floor, the ground elevation before the new base flood elevation, the revised H&H analysis by the engineers who do our modeling, revised topographic information based on new development and stuff, or maybe they just got a new letter of map change. Any number of reasons why it could be superseded. And then you want to notify those property owners as soon as possible because then they might be required to have flood insurance or something, or be subject to the regulations. Okay. I'm sorry we went a little bit late. Let's take a 4 or 5 minute break, come back at like 11:10 and talk about letters of map revision based on fill. And then Caitlin, there is a poll question if you want to launch that. So yeah, if you want a certificate, then I need you to participate in both poll questions because ASFPM makes me keep those records to make sure that people are actually participating to get those credits. But when can the MTEZ form be used? A single residential structure in the floodway, a commercial structure in the Zone a residential structure in Zone A, or a subdivision in Zone A. So hopefully you've been paying attention. You don't have to get these correct. I just need you to participate for the certificate, but just a little knowledge check. Has everyone participated, maybe, Caitlin?
Yeah, it looks like we're around that range now, so I'll end the poll.
Cool. All right, wow, you guys are smart. Yes, a residential structure in Zone A, so only one structure that's in Zone A. They can get a LOMA in the floodway, but you have to use the MT1 form. Okay, yeah, one structure residential. So, sorry, okay, I'll try and get through the next one a little bit faster. Maybe we'll break to like 11:15 if that sounds okay with everyone, and then we'll come back and get into part 2. And I apologize for the timing. I thought I was going to be short. All right, we'll see you at 11:15. Thanks. Okay. Um, right. So the timing of the fill is in the Code of Federal Regulations. And so again, if the fill is placed before the area is identified as flood prone on the map, so this earthen fill material would be considered natural grade and not fill. And so it can be kind of hard to prove that, but there are documents related to the property stored with the community or the county, as well as aerial photography that can kind of help support that information. But if you can do that, again, consider natural grade and not fill, and then in that case, we can go back to the LOMA and do it that way, as it's been elevated to or above the base flood elevation, so that that lowest adjacent grade is at that elevation. So just something to be noted. We have, worked through violations where this rule was helpful. Um, but basically, the FEMA reviewers are going to determine whether or not that's valid. So there might be some back and forth with them, but that's, pretty common. Just different ways we can try to help property owners not get into trouble by doing things. But anyhow, the MT1 form for LOMR-F, again, this can and is used for LOMAs that are for commercial properties. If it's a LOMA in the floodway, then we need this extra evaluation to do that, or multiple properties. And so, as I mentioned, the MT1 form has just a little bit more information that is required for its submission rather than the MT-EZ, which again was just for one residential property for a LOMA. For the LOMR-F, all of them are MT1. Again, you can use it for any LOMA, the MT1 application. And if you're doing any of those examples, then you have to use the MT1. Um, Again, this one also has the same expiration date as the MTEZ back in 2014, and there has not been any update to that, so we are still using this form. Um, so again, if you have a previously saved version, just go ahead and just do a quick Google search to make sure that they have not been updated, but I have not heard or anticipate any type of update to these. So there can be some confusion between MT1 and MT2. So as I mentioned, MT-EZ, MT1, and MT2. So the MT2 form is for the LOMAR process, which again is a much bigger project for a large scale change to base flood elevations for some type of big development. And so that goes through the entire community. We would definitely be in touch about that. Your contractors would be working with us probably, and like on the both on the CAP side, on my side, which is community assistance, and then also on the mapping side for this type of documentation. So you would be well aware of a project like that going on. So there's confusion sometimes between which forms are used when, but for the MT1, again, we're looking at those types of LOMAs, which we went over in the last hour, and then LOMR-Fs, basically, where we are elevating things on earth and fill, and to remove them from the floodplain by building a large fill pad and then building on top of that to make sure that it is not subject to regulations and that it's not required to have the flood insurance. And so anything related to the floodway, let's get that out of the way. Any change to a floodway is not for this process. Anything like that would have to be the MT2, or you need the no rise certification to make sure that you are not causing a rise in the base flood elevation. And so anything involving those types of changes would be either MT2 or the no rise. So there's no fill going in the floodway. You cannot put fill in the floodway for this process. Anything that might create an alluvial fan or have an alluvial fan, so that doesn't really apply very much in Kansas. Sorry. So yeah, that's not very much a concern in this part of the country. Anything that has fill in the floodway, as I mentioned, that like that, channelization projects, bridge and culvert replacement projects, or other flood control improvements, that's going to involve other types of permitting that would fall outside of the scope of the LOMR-F and would probably involve our stream obstructions team. And so, yeah, we have had people just go into a stream channel and just start trying to change things and that kind of stuff. And that is far outside the scope of this. Also, that's a violation. So definitely good to keep an eye on stuff like that. Anything that would involve coastal high hazard, we are not in those areas just yet. No coastal high hazard areas, but it is in the documentation, so that's why we mention it. And again, anything like that would be part of the LOMAR process, most likely. Um, So yeah, we do have very technical training on the MT2 form from different engineers that we work with. So if you're interested in that, I can definitely send it. And they go through step by step the MT2 form. Again, very technical, would be a very community-wide project and not the type of work that we'd be discussing today. So for the MT1, again, we are talking about LOMR-Fs adding earthen fill to a property to elevate future development. And so again, you have this checklist, LOMA, CLOMA, LOMR-F, and CLOMR-F. So the CLOMA and CLOMR-F are the conditional letter of map amendment or letter of map revision based on fill. And so basically you have this option to submit those, and then FEMA will give you a statement on whether or not the proposed development would be not inundated by the base flood elevation if it's built as proposed. So not really thinking of a situation where that's required. Now a CLOMAR is sometimes required, which again is a bigger project, but a CLOMAR-F, yeah, they will look into a little bit more things than they would if you just file a LOMR-F, but most people are not filing these conditional letters. They are pretty much optional, but it just has that insurance level, like ensuring that things will be removed from the floodplain if you build as proposed in your application, and then there's a little bit of a discount on the follow-up LOMA or LOMR-F. So you do still have to file separately that final letter, but there's a little bit of a discount on the cost of that. Um, I don't think I mentioned the LOMA does not have a cost associated with it, but the LOMR-F certainly does. And so I do not think those payments have been changed since these forms were last updated, but there is a payment form associated with this if you are filing for a CLOMAR or LOMAR-F. So, um, and then there's basically you have the first page that's property information, and then the property form, and then a payment and elevation form. So there's a couple of different pages here. And then the community form, which is really important that we'll get into. Um, and so someone might bill or someone might file for a CLOMA if they were working in the floodway, like, hey, this is naturally above the base flood elevation, so let's just make sure of that, even though that's probably a bad decision, but that might be a case where someone files a CLOMA. I have all these notes. Yeah, so if you have if you're planning on building on a fill pad, some people just want to file a CLOMR-F and just make sure. Um, okay, so I had a lot of notes on that slide. So again, timing is everything with fill. In this case, you can see the ground has obviously been altered. There's unnatural fill that's been used to elevate this structure. And of course, the timing, when was it mapped in versus when was the fill placed? Again, if it was before that certain date, then it's considered natural. But the MT1 application does have this question to help establish that and to make sure that you're on the right form. So has fill been placed on your property to raise the ground that was previously below the base flood elevation, yes or no? And if yes, when was that placed? So the Endangered Species Act is something that has been in contention for a long time. Just a little bit of background that basically FEMA got sued by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services for not ensuring compliance with this federal law. And so FEMA then kind of put the responsibility of checking that onto communities. And so that's why this is in here. I think if you file for a conditional letter with the MT1 application, they will look into whether there could be endangered species concerns. But if it's just a Lomar F, they assume that you have already done that and that you have looked into it to make sure that there's no um, taking of endangered species habitat or harm to any endangered species. And so they are only concerned with federal endangered species. There are state endangered species. That's a little bit different and obviously a wider range of species that we'd be concerned about. Like there are some species that are just rare in Kansas that are endangered by the state, but are plentiful elsewhere. And so again, we're just looking at the federal part, and how they do this has been changed a little bit. Because we always direct people to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. They have a field office in Manhattan, Kansas, and so they I'm not entirely clear. I've been kind of asking around on how they do this, but it has changed. So you can always ask them, but there might be a more, I don't know if it's harder or not, but there's a different process using the IPAC system, and so we'll get into that, but definitely something to be aware of. You have to have some kind of documentation and look into whether there's any endangered species to be concerned about, depending on the time of year and what your development is. So that's just something to be aware of. We don't want to get in trouble with, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. Um, so again, has fill been placed, yes or no, or will fill be placed? And that goes back to the conditional or either the actual LOMR-F. And then you have the street address, property, which we kind of went over in the last hour, and then the legal description, which you can find with the deed. And then are you requesting the determination for either structures? Again, we can do multiple structures now on this form, the date of construction, or a portion of the property, which we need the meets and bounds description for that, or the entire legal property. And then is it for a single structure, single lot, or multiple structures, and how many, or multiple lots and how many? So again, this is a could be a larger scope in this instance. Trying to see if I forgot anything. Okay. Again, the Endangered Species Act, it's been very convoluted, and FEMA will not put out any clear guidance on this. And there's just been a lot of discussion about, like, can we, clear this up, especially with all the changes that are going on with the administration. Like, can we clear what is supposed to happen with this? So it's mostly going to be in those undeveloped floodplain areas, in those like open field areas where we might have this happen. It's not super common for us to run into a problem with this, but it could be an area that contains habitat or rare species. And so if that does happen, you might need a permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. And by you, I mean the applicant having an incidental take permit when those things are impacted by non-federal activity. And so you can identify those and or regulate tracks that are home to them. So you might want to look into, if you have any endangered species in your community, just what to look out for. Um, they have been promising us new guidance, but that hasn't happened yet. And I know it says coming soon, but I don't know if that's really true. Uh, just because FEMA has been in litigation for so long with these different lawsuits with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services and other entities that have sued them over this particular issue. There's been one lawsuit that was settled in California that had been holding things up for a while. So it's kind of unknown at this point. They, again, have been promising guidance, but they haven't really given it to us. The Kansas Wildlife and Parks website lists species by county to be aware of. Again, those will list um, state species as well. We're only looking at the federal ones. I mean, it might be good to look out for those species as well, but as far as compliance, yes. And then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services field office can make a determination usually, but from what I've been told, they're now requiring applicants to use the IPAC, which is the Information for Planning and Consulting website. And I do know that they have lots of training on their website. They have different videos on how to use their services, but they have like different levels of packages that you can put together for submission. And so definitely if there's any questions about this, you should go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. And yeah, the last I heard, they were requiring that and that it has been and will be accepted with FEMA. They have some kind of agreement now between U.S. Fish and Wildlife and FEMA that they have this agreement for this particular website service and those packages to be accepted as documentation and validation that the ESA has been complied with. I don't know. So supposedly it's saved the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services a lot of time to incorporate into their planning and saves a lot of delays and stuff. So it seems like it's good. It just is kind of on the newer side, and so there was some like confusion as to whether it would be accepted or not, but apparently it is kind of what they're using now to comply with this. So if you have questions, definitely go to that website. And like I said, there's lots of training, and you can always reach out to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services field office in Manhattan. Um, as long as there's still people there, we usually have them you know, in our contacts, and you just send them an email to review your request and have a map and just kind of describe the project, and they can usually direct you in the right way. Um, so yeah, it's been kind of confusing over the last couple of years, but that is their email address down there at the bottom. If you just put your location, your project information, attach a map, and they can either guide you towards being okay or maybe using the IPAC website and putting together a package that way. Um, and we do still at this point have our interagency review process. So if you end up submitting something um, within the state, they'll like review other needed permits. So we do still have that. Okay. And this is that website where you can look at different counties by threatened and endangered species. So if you are curious and might help you look at what you might have to be concerned about, you can go and look at that list. Um, yep, so that's where their website's located, the Kansas field office for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. And this is what the IPAC website looks like. So as you can see, like underneath, integrate the environmental review process into your project design. You can explore the species and habitat, you can conduct a regulatory review, or build a consultation package. And like I said, there's training on this website to put this together. Um, but again, if you file for a LOMR-F, which is most common, FEMA's saying that you have already determined this compliance. So that's why they're signing off on it. And so if you mess up and have an accidental taking, there could be some issues with violations that way. Uh, so yeah, you can look at that. Also, we have now this flood risk and endangered species habitat map, so FRESH map, that can also just help you visualize where the federally listed and threatened and endangered species might be. So I think this is just kind of more of an advisory tool that we can use. I've looked into a little bit. I've taken some training on this, but that's what it just seems to be. I mean, there's also a CRS activity that is associated with this, but it might just give you a better visualization of things that you might need to be aware of. But for CRS, it's basically a floodplain species assessment and plan, where you identify these areas that you would want to protect and conserve for those species. Um, and then you review that information and come up with a plan for implementation and recovery measures. So if you're a CRS community, that is a thing that you can do, but I haven't seen much of this, and I don't know what's going to happen with CRS, and they were redesigning, and then now we have a new administration with different priorities. So everything's kind of up in the air right now, so I don't have solid answers on everything regarding this stuff, but um, as the MTEZ does, it also has a checklist, the MT1 form, so just complete the checklist, and this is just helpful to make sure that we're submitting everything that we might need. So like the LOMA, you would also need the effective firm panel, the subdivision plat map for the property, the deed, just a copy of the deed, the elevation form. So again, you could alternatively submit an elevation certificate if that has already been completed for that property in lieu of the elevation form. Then, of course, the map that has the scale and the north arrow, submit that. And then importantly, community acknowledgement form, so we'll get into that. And then underneath there, you can see the LOMR-Fs is where they want you to document the ESA compliance because they can't say that it will be approved if you build as is without looking at if you complied with the ESA. So that's why they need that documentation. Otherwise, they assume that you have already documented that. So it's not required for the actual LOMR-F. And then, of course, they want you to submit in a digital format. We have some people in Kansas that are kind of stubbornly, I do everything on paper for some reason, but they are really wanting the digital format and are really pushing that. And the paperwork burden is on every single page of all of these forms. So they're trying to get all of that. So just making sure you have all of that. This is just a helpful tool to make sure that you're submitting everything that needs to go in there. And then before you make a payment, make sure you're doing the right one. As I said, the LOMA does not have a payment, but it looks like the CLOMA does, or CLOMR-F, so that's $500. Again, LOMAs are free. LOMR-F, following a CLOMR-F is $325. Um, Whereas if you don't do a CLOMR-F, it's $425. And then multiple lots or structures, 700, multiple lots of structures for LOMAR, CLOMR. So you can read through them. So you have these different payments that need to be made depending on what you're applying for. And then, of course, include your email address on that. Again, it's easy to make corrections or just, submit additional evidence that you need rather than postal mail. And then, of course, don't waste money on submitting a LOMR-F that will not be accepted. So this comes up quite a bit, and I'd always try to explain to people like FEMA is caring about what the lowest adjacent grade is compared to the base flood elevation. That's all they care about, and I get a lot of explanations like um, it's at this, it's never flooded here, that kind of stuff. I'm like, FEMA does not care about that. They care about the mapping, they care about what the boundaries are, and they care about these two specific elevations. That's kind of the bottom line. And I try to work with people to find different solutions, but sometimes there is not one. Again, I talked about getting a LOMA with a basement on natural grade, but as you can see in this particular picture on their publication, those are not natural grade. You can see where the fill has been added for the entire thing. Um, and so, like, we do have the residential basement exemption program, which has kind of really been outdated. And we only have 10 communities that ever entered it, and we had a lot of issues with it. So, no basements with a LOMR-F. And sometimes people would try to build a fill pad and then get the LOMR-F, get it approved, take it out of the floodplain, and then build a basement. And that is a problem, and FEMA has tried to address it. So we went over this. Again, natural grade for a LOMA, but you cannot do that with a LOMR-F, and FEMA will not approve that. And so we went over this. And so I don't know if we went over the top right photo. So that is called a walkout basement, and it's still considered a basement by FEMA for sure. It's basically a basement that has like a little patio area. In this case, it's just kind of an entryway, but still, it's not going to be approved for a LOMR-F. It could be a LOMA if it's on natural grade and it's pre-firm. So those are two completely different things that people often have questions on and get a little bit mixed up on. Obviously, in Kansas, we have lots and lots of basements, so it comes up quite often. Um, so yeah, the bottom of the page. Yeah, so when you do sign, and we'll get into the community acknowledgement form, but when you sign it, you are again saying that you um, have everything correct to the best of your knowledge, and that a false statement could be punishable by law. So, I mean, a little bit maybe about crawl spaces here I have in my notes. So, a property with a crawl space, if the interior is any part below the exterior, it's considered a basement because FEMA considers a basement anything that's below grade on all four sides. So this is something that you could run into with a LOMR-F. Like people have built crawl spaces and then put fill around the outside to try to get a LOMR-F and say that it's elevated on fill when then the inside of the crawl space is below grade, and then that makes it a basement, which makes it a violation. And then when FEMA finds these things out, when there's an application that comes through that gets denied and there's like a potential violation, they go through us at the state and then we have to go to you to get it figured out and enforced. So that's something to be aware of, that FEMA does flag these applications for potential violations, and then we have to do the enforcement and make sure that those things come into compliance because that's what our jobs are. So, we have to do the violation and enforcement process. And so, and it can be difficult to fix, and especially if you call attention to something like this with FEMA, then it becomes like an official thing that we have to work through. And people do not like being told that they have to fill in their basement. They don't like being told that they have to elevate their houses, and so that's just something to be aware of when you're reviewing an application. And an MT1 application does have to go through the floodplain administrator. That's part of one of the forms. Um, Another thing that people are not aware of often, that for a LOMA and a LOMR-F, the any attached garage or deck also has to be at or above the base flood elevation, otherwise it won't be approved. So I do get that question quite a bit, and if you have an elevation certificate, that is C2H on the elevation certificate. Um, yeah, and especially in case if that is used for the LOMA or LOMR-F, we are looking at that as well as the lowest adjacent grade. So that also has to be there. And then, of course, we went over this in the last hour. You can look at the community status book or on the firm panel to find the NFIP community number. And so make sure that that is correct. The rest of this is pretty easy. Property name or address are the elevations listed below for existing or proposed. Again, that goes back into whether it's the conditional or not. And then they do ask about the existing proposed structures listed below, what the type of construction. They want to know that because that's going to tie into the lowest floor elevation. Um, the subsidence things come back into play if you're in Cherokee or Reno counties. The datums, any conversion factors, that still has to go in there. And then the latitude and longitude, again, fifth decimal place, it might be good to go for six at this point, but it's very straightforward. And then this is what the community status book looks like. And so you can just Google Kansas Community Status Book, maybe put FEMA on the end of that, and then it'll pull it up and you can see that for your community. So again, proposed is for LOMR-F. That's all. And then the lowest uh, ground elevation within the meets and bounds description. So if you're doing it for a section of property or a full property, again, we need the meets and bounds description, and then what the lowest lot elevation is instead of We're looking at that rather than the lowest adjacent grade to a structure because we're looking at more than just the structure. So pretty straightforward, um, that type of information. If you're doing multiple, then they have like this extra page so you can add in all of that information for the different properties. And then this picture is just obviously showing a manufactured home that's on top of a pa fill pad, sorry. Um, and usually those are supposed to have vegetation. I don't know if this is really compliant, but mostly we're looking at is it at or above the base flood elevation? And then in this case, the deck or stairs, I guess it's just stairs, is that at or above the base flood elevation because they're a little bit lower than the structure, but that would be a point that we're looking at. And then it also kind of depends on is it structurally attached or not? Because sometimes you have decks or stairs that are adjacent to a structure, but they're not considered to be structurally attached. And so that is something to look at and consider and can maybe help you out if there's any issues. Like these are not structurally attached. They don't need to be part of the evaluation of this application. So just kind of a tip there. And then in this case, this manufactured home also has some skirting around it. Skirting, which is like either aluminum or some other type of like flexible material that's not part of the structure. And so like the lowest floor, as you can see, is like at the top of the stairs. And so that would be the lowest floor. And then you have skirting around it that's not structurally supporting. So there's these different little caveats to the different types of construction, especially with manufactured homes. But again, always reach out if you have questions. It can get confusing quickly. Um, Again, this is what the NGS has for conversions of datums. So they have this software just freely available. And this is also the site where you can go and look at all the benchmarks that they maintain, and they have like full descriptions of them. And so it's much different in this day and age than how it used to be. Like listed on the firm, and it was just like a nail in a tree somewhere. They have these maintained, and you have all the data and imagery, and they have like information about the like satellites and stuff and all that like surveying information. So this would be your hub for that stuff. And then this is kind of the important one for the floodplain administrators doing the community form. So this is form number 3, important. Read all the instructions on this page before signing. So this page has a lot of information on it that basically you are signing off that you are aware of these things, that you have verified these things, and you'll be asked to sign it when people apply for these. So it's important to review all of the plans, the disclosure notice, and so yeah, let's look at that. Requests involving the placement of fill, that you have completed a review on this and that it's designed to meet all of the community floodplain management requirements, including no fill in the floodway. All other federal and state permits have been obtained. Um, and then it goes into the LOMR-F, where again, that's where they ask you to document the ESA. Otherwise, for a LOMR-F, they assume that you've already done that. And so, yeah, they say the LOMR-F, you've already complied with sections 9 and 10 of the ESA for no taking or harming of species, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, and that it will be reasonably safe from flooding. So if you read through this carefully, basically the project that you're approving is designed to meet your floodplain management requirements, which we've always taken to mean that it meets your regulations, your like design, your design performance requirements in your ordinance. And so basically it's going to comply with those. And so that's how we've interpreted it. Um, I've gotten some pushback on that, but that's kind of how it reads. Basically, if you have someone that is proposing to put a fill pad in your floodplain, then you should be reviewing what the design is for the development because people are not going to put in a request to build a fill pad and then not put anything on it. So you need to look at what those design plans are before you sign off on the community acknowledgement form. And we've had a lot of issues with this. Um, just people, typically what's happening is people put in a fill pad and then they want to get the LOMR-F, as I mentioned, and then put in a basement. And that is not compliant, we don't think, with the community acknowledgement form. And so we want to make sure that um, that is not happening because it says floodplain management requirements, including these other things, but also that your lowest floor is at least 1 foot above the base flood elevation, and that means not really putting in a basement. So just putting that out there, it's a lot to look over, so it's not something to be signed arbitrarily. And we have come across situations where this form was signed by someone who was not a community official, and so basically went around the back of the floodplain administrator and their program. So, anyways, a lot to take in and not sign arbitrarily. And I've helped lots of floodplain administrators to review these things to make sure that they can sign off on them. So, anyways, I just wanted to point that out. Again, it is legally binding and stuff, and there's other ways to ensure compliance. Like you can put a covenant on the deed or something to make sure that, that doesn't happen. So you can do a non-conversion agreement, but just saying like a covenant on the deed for no basements is a little bit more legally binding as far as we've been told. So you have these other tools that you can ensure and document compliance that you were, working to have compliance rather than, this is the fault of the property owner who lied to you or something. There's ways to protect yourself. We just want to point this out and to not sign this like arbitrarily. Um, Again, new development needs to comply. So you've completed or proposed project meets the design requirements for the community. So again, even if a LOMR-F structure or property is removed from the special flood hazard area, there's no basements. The lowest floor is at least 1 foot above. It meets FEMA minimums for approval, but you are expected to comply with your higher standards. And that's another thing that has caused issues is FEMA approves these based on their minimums, meaning like things are at or above the base flood elevation, and they will approve it regardless of our state or local standards. And it's kind of it it's not great. I mean, they don't really help us to promote the higher standards by doing that, but we are expected to comply with what we've adopted as a state and as communities. And so reasonably safe from flooding means that, it's at or above the base flood elevation, but still we cannot have that lowest floor um, violation. So again, the state permit for fill, it's a state law when you apply for fill that the lowest floor is at least 1 foot above the base flood elevation, and that's in our zoning laws. So that's why it still has to be complied with, and that it doesn't really line up with FEMA's minimum standards, and there's no really enforcement mechanism except for the floodplain administrator. So that, it's not perfect, but again, LOMR-F areas can be added to your ordinance, so that we have that higher standard where you can add in any LOMR-F property still has to comply with this ordinance, and that can help you with the enforcement aspect of it. And we did just come out with our new higher standards document, so we haven't really like released it yet. I'm still waiting on approval from like FEMA and our legal and stuff, but we do have a new document that just goes through different higher standards that you can adopt for CRS as well as just for these enforcement pieces. And then again, the community form, you have that current or proposed project. We're not working in the regulatory floodway because again, that would be something else. Federal, state, and local permits, Endangered Species Act, reasonably safe from flooding. So those are the kind of important pieces on that. Again, um, complies with your local program. And with the regulatory floodway, again, that would need a no-rise certificate and it could possibly go into the LOMAR area. And so there's a little bit of like gray area whether you can do an MT1 LOMR-F application with fill in the floodway if you get a no-rise, or I guess it's really dependent on whether it will change the base flood elevation. So that's what we need to see in that analysis. And if it is, then it would be the LOMAR process. But again, those are usually much larger projects. Um, so yeah, as I explained, we have had these situations before where someone inadvertently created a basement trying to get a LOMR-F. So it's just something to be aware of. So this person had a slab, and they put it like earth and fill around it, around a crawl space, and then that's when it came non-compliant. And then we get the violation notice, and then we have to work through it, and then FEMA keeps checking in with us to make sure that we have worked through the enforcement with the floodplain administrator. So again, if an application that's not compliant gets submitted, it will be flagged for a violation, and then we have to work through it. A tiny bit about insurance. They're looking at the first floor height, which is the first floor above the basement. So just that's how insurance works at this point. This is the discount explanation guide that I mentioned, and you can find all the different types of discounts that people can get for how much. Community acknowledgement form. So you sign this box for a LOMA without fill in a floodway. So if you have a LOMA that's going through with an MT1 application, you still have to sign the community acknowledgement form, but it's section B instead of section A. Again, floodways are on the map, so don't sign the community form where there's fill in the floodway for sure. That needs some more investigation. Again, the payment form, you can check if there's any change to this on the FEMA website, but I'm pretty certain there has not been quite yet. You have the submission online website, which is mostly just used by surveyors or engineers who submit these applications, but this is FEMA's preferred method. And then, of course, if you intentionally lie to the federal government, it could be a crime or would be a crime. So, we don't need to do that. We've had very few issues with surveyors ever submitting false information on purpose. It's been like one or two cases ever that we've had to deal with that. So if you want to learn more about this, FEMA does have a course on this, and they have lots of courses on different stuff. And again, we have all of our training recorded on the website for over the last 5 years. So if you want to learn more, you can go to our YouTube channel. It's all on there in our website. If people need help finding a surveyor, we usually guide them to the Kansas Society of Land Surveyors because we can't recommend anyone personally, but we can, help them find a resource to look into surveyors, and they should, be asking lots of questions of their experience and, their pricing and how far they have to travel and that kind of stuff. But this is a good place to start for that. And then again, most of the questions are in the instructions. They're pretty detailed. And then if you need even more help, of course, just call me. Um, but you have floodsmart.gov, you have the rest of our training. If you need to reach out to FEMA directly, you can do that through Region 7. The map service portal is there. Just let me know if you ever need any help. I help people all the time. And then we have our last two poll questions. Woo, I finished right at 12 o'clock. That's great. So if you want a certificate, just answer the second poll question, and then we'll just send another poll to ask if you want a certificate. You don't have to have one. Some people want them for credit. Some people just want one for documentation that they took some training. So the community acknowledgement form ensures which of the following: compliance with the Endangered Species Act, new development will be compliant with current regulation, no fill has been placed in the regulatory floodway, or all of the above. Again, please answer if you are going to request a certificate. And while you do that, I'll just go to the last slide here. So me and Caitlin, we're on the floodplain team. We take questions for technical assistance. And then if you have questions about stream obstructions or those fill permits that are needed with a LOMR-F, if you have on average a foot or more fill, Janelle Phillips uh, with our Manhattan group can help. She's our stream obstruction team lead. So cool. Thanks, Caitlin. Yes, all of the above. So we just went through that for sure. Current regulations, endangered species, and any work in the regulatory floodway for sure. And then our last poll is just, do you want a certificate? And I should be able to get that out to you in the next couple of days, hopefully. I will stop sharing, and I don't know if we have anything in the chat. Doesn't look like it. Okay. Well, if anyone has any questions, you can come off mute or you can send me an email anytime. I've worked with many of you before on different cases and stuff, but yeah, absolutely. So this will be posted to YouTube and I'll get those certificates out. But thanks, everyone.